Hey everybody, Chris Lazo here, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be discussing the 3 reasons why you should not memorize your notes, and the 1 thing you should do instead. Now, this question always comes up at some point in people's journey of public speaking, and it's something like this. Chris, I don't feel like I am being myself. I feel like things are stodgy and rigid, and I'm not feeling very natural in my speaking voice. What do I do? And perhaps you felt this way as well. For example, do you ever feel stuck to your notes, right? Or do you ever feel rigid in your presentation? Or do you ever feel disconnected from your listeners? These are things that all of us as public speakers feel at some point or another, and we want to be more engaging as we speak to our audience, whether it's a live audience or a YouTube or Instagram Live, any type of live presentation or even a recording. The problem is, how do we do it? And for a lot of people, the conventional solution that a lot of people come to is this. I will memorize my notes. That's what a lot of people tend to say, or the conclusion that they come to is, I'll just memorize my notes. And if my eyes aren't locked on my notes, I will be able to make eye contact with people. I'll be myself. I'll be able to speak more fluidly and freely. And so they begin memorizing their notes word for word. Now, there's a problem with that. And the problem with this conventional solution is memorization often has the opposite effect of what we intended. What we intend is we want to be free, we want to be spontaneous, we want to make eye contact with people, we want to be more engaging and more connected. Memorization is one of the worst things that you could do if that's your goal. And here's why. Memorizing your notes will make you sound unnatural because you're memorizing word for word a script. And that's very difficult to do when you're speaking to an audience, is to sound like yourself, because there's not a lot of freedom in your speech. You're spending most of your energy trying to remember your next line. Now, unless you are a skilled orator or an actor, this will be very difficult and you'll end up sounding unnatural. The second reason is we are inflexible when we memorize our notes word for word. What do I mean by that? Well, you have no liberty to go off the script. If as you're speaking, something comes to mind or there's a reaction in the audience that you kind of want to riff on, you won't be able to do that because you're sticking to a memorized script. And lastly, we become unengaging. Sometimes all of our mental energy is spent on memorizing these words and bringing to mind the next words that we memorized, that we just can't connect with the audience. And so I found that memorization is actually a terrible thing that we should try to steer clear of. Here's something I want you to do instead. If your goal is to be more engaging and connected, to make eye contact, to be more free, do this instead. Internalize sequences. What do I mean by sequences? Well, what is a sequence? A sequence is a particular order in which related events, movements, or things follow each other, okay? So now we're not talking about word for word, we're talking about movements and blocks and sections, or as I like to call them, sequences. I want you, in other words, to think in sequences, not in words. We are going to commit some things to memory. We are going to internalize certain things. We're not going to do that to everything. We're not going to remember or memorize or internalize everything, just what we need to know. And what we need to do and what we need to know is think in sequences, not in words. So I want you to think in sequences. That is going to require that you have a strong outline with main points at your service. So there's going to be a little bit of work involved in doing this and doing it well. But if you put in the footwork, you'll start to see a lot of great results. Now, we've talked about outlines before in my email broadcast on chrislazo.com. I've also spent a little bit of time in my coursework explaining how to put together an outline, and I'll probably do that from time to time on YouTube as well. But for those of you who missed it or just need a recap, I'll give you a very simple outline that you could use almost anywhere. That's why I call it the Anywhere Outline. And it's a basic outline, and it starts with a problem. In other words, whether you are a presenter or a business executive, or you're giving a keynote speech, or you are a creative, maybe you're a book author that's promoting your book, any presentation you give, you want to think in terms of a problem or a need that your audience has. So let's use the book author who's promoting their book as an example. If you are speaking at Barnes & Noble to a group of people about your book, you want to start by addressing a felt need that they have, okay? But second, you want to move to a solution. And usually your product or your service or your big idea is the solution to their need or their problem. And then lastly, you want to end with an application. Here's how you can take some steps forward in realizing that solution. So this is a basic outline, one that you could use almost anywhere. If you look at the most popular TED Talks, they all use this format. You start with a problem that your audience has, you move to a solution that will work for them, and then you give them a way forward or an application. Now, that's a very simple outline. If you have a long time, maybe you're speaking for 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe longer, you're going to fill that out. In other words, you're not just voicing a problem. You're probably going to give some supportive material for that problem. And you're not just going to give a solution, but you're going to give supportive material for that solution. You probably won't just give them a straight application. You might give them a few ways forward. I have here listed 3. Now, what kind of supportive material? Well, you might list the problem that your listeners have, but then you might reinforce that main point with, I'll just give you an example, maybe a statistic that kind of reinforces the problem. And then you might follow that statistic with a case study, maybe a testimony from someone else of that same struggle. And then again, if you look at the screen here, you don't just give the solution, you might also move from solution to an illustration of how that worked, an illustration of what that might look like. And then maybe from the illustration, you might give a personal testimony of how that solution worked for you. And then in your application, you might give 1, 2, or maybe 3 action steps for how to realize that. So see how, look at the screen here, where you start with a basic framework, problem, solution, application, but can easily end up with a longer speech. And that's how we develop material for our speeches. Now, when I say internalize sequences, I'm not saying memorize your speech word for word. I'm saying memorize these basic blocks. Now, I'll show you in the screen here. From the problem to the statistic that reinforces the problem, to the case study that gives an example of the problem, that is one sequence. So when I'm memorizing my first sequence, I'm just remembering in my head, okay, when I get up to speak or when I push record, I want to speak about that problem, that specific problem. I want to give that statistic to reinforce it, and then I'll go into a case study. Now, I haven't memorized what I'm going to say. Half the time, I don't even know how I'm going to say it. I'm just memorizing where I'm about to go. That first sequence, I'm going to give a problem, a statistic, and a case study. That's the first sequence. I'm going to memorize that. Well, here's the second sequence. I'm going to memorize the solution, the illustration I've already chosen, and maybe a personal story or testimony. Now, I don't know word for word what I'm going to say. I'm not reading this from a script, but I have committed to memory and internalized what actually matters. I'm internalizing kind of that pathway, the solution, the illustration, and the testimony. And then the application is going to be easy. I'm memorizing the 3 steps. Again, not word for word, not verbatim, just what I need to remember in order to get from point A to point B. So, these are what you internalize. The sequences. You are internalizing sequences, not memorizing words. And that is extremely powerful. Don't memorize what you're going to say. Internalize when you're going to say it and where you're going to say it, right? That's what I do. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm not memorizing words. I'm not looking at a script. I'm internalizing when I'm going to say the things that I've already planned on saying. And as I get there, well, the words will just come. That's where I can speak a little more extemporaneously. Now, maybe you're saying, gosh, that's really complicated. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that yet. Seems like a lot of robust work. Well, here's a simplified version for you to get a taste and a feel for this. One, do have your notes to read. If you're going to do a recording or a live broadcast or a live presentation, do have notes. But instead of writing down all the words you're going to say like a word-for-word manuscript, write down bullet points of where you want to go, the main points and maybe some subpoints. Write down the bullet points and not the manuscripts. And become familiar before you speak with those bullet points. Now, if you have to read your notes, it's okay. But if you have bullet points instead of word for word, you're just going to use those notes as a placeholder and a map. And that's going to allow you to engage the audience and kind of speak a little more naturally and spontaneously. And so instead of, as we spoke earlier in this video, instead of feeling unnatural, inflexible, and unengaged, by internalizing sequences, you'll start to feel a little more authentic, you'll start to feel spontaneity, and you'll gain a little bit more confidence because you're not stuck to your notes. You're able to speak to your audience, yet with a map that prevents you from going on a bunch of tangents and getting lost. So, I hope this was helpful for you. This is the 3 reasons why you should not memorize your notes, and the one thing you can do instead, and that is to internalize sequences. Try that out. Record a video, give a speech, talk to your friends, see if it helps you out. And if this video helps you out, please give me a like on this YouTube video, share it with your friends. And if you like this kind of material, you can subscribe to my email broadcast. I talk about all kinds of stuff like this and write about it. And I give it away for free training. You can get all of that training, subscribe to it at chrislazo.com. Otherwise, I will see you next week on this YouTube channel.